everyone, my name is Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations, and today we're going to be doing some cables. For this sock design, I have 6 different cables, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to talk you through what these cables mean. I'm going to show you a couple different ways of doing it, and if you want to just skip to the cable instructions, you can click the links below, which will link you directly to whichever cable you're working on. That can be great if you are going back and working on them, or if you just need a quick refresher. To get started, I highly recommend that you have a cable needle. For doing socks, I like to have a very skinny, sharp-pointed cable needle, like this one from Cocoa Knits. Alternatively, you could use a paper clip that you've bent into a cable shape. There are cable needles that are shaped other ways, or you could just use a double-pointed needle. The idea is to put just a couple stitches, 1 or 2, onto the cable needle to allow you to switch the directions of the stitches. I am going to show you a couple different ways though, and some of those do not require the use of a cable needle. You just have to be a little bit more adept with your knitting. All right, let's take a look at these symbols and these indicators that you'll find in the pattern. You may find that these are in color in your pattern, but I have them here in black and white so that they'll work for any pattern that you may be knitting. Let's talk about these 2 basic cables, the 11LC and the 11RC. What this does is it takes your 2 stitches on the needles and reverses them, either like this or like this. So a left cross is going to take 1 stitch and move it over the other stitch to put it onto this side. The right cross is going to take 1 stitch and put it over, slanting towards the right. And you can see in the symbols, this one slants towards the right and this one slants toward the left. Let me show you what this looks like on the needles. All right, let's work the 1/1LC. That LC stands for left cross, and we're going to take 2 knit stitches and we're going to cross one over the other so that it slants to the left. The one that is slanting to the left will be in front of the other one. So this is what we do. I'm going to slip 1 onto the cable needle, and I'm going to hold that to the front of the work. That's going to keep that cable in the front as I work the next stitch. I'm going to knit this stitch, then I knit 1 off of the cable needle. And that is my 1/1 left cross. Now, this is different than the LPC because with that one, we would have purled this stitch right here, but we want there to be 2 knit stitches at this point. And so that's why we work that 1/1LC. Now, there are a couple different ways to do this. So I'm going to show you how you can do it without the use of a cable needle. Okay, to knit this 1/1LC without the use of a cable needle, I want to move this stitch right here behind the other stitch and then have it be on this needle. So I'm going to do it this way. I take my right needle and I go into the back of that second stitch purlwise. So I'm picking up that stitch purlwise, but I'm doing it through the back because I want that to be behind this stitch right here. So I go in purlwise, bring that needle to the front, and then I take off this, this stitch, the first stitch. I go in purlwise and pull it off the needle. And that reverses the position of the stitches, and now I can just knit each one. Now they do kind of want to climb on top of each other, so be sure that you're knitting that back stitch first, and then knit the second stitch, and you now have your left cross. There is one other way to do it that I'm going to show you. Now, you may have seen some of my patterns use a 1/1 left cross quite a bit, and so I have this other shortcut method which does not involve rearranging the stitches. It's actually worked all at once. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my right needle and go into the back of the second stitch on the needle, and I'm going to knit that stitch while it's still on the needle. I keep the stitch on the needle. Then I bring the right needle to the front and I go into the first stitch on the needle and I knit it the way that I normally would. Then I take this off the needle and it has worked a 1-1 left cross with each of those stitches being knit. All right, I'm ready to work a 1-1 right cross. It's 1/1 RC. And what I'm doing with this stitch is I'm taking 2 stockinette stitches and I'm crossing one over the other so that it will slant to the right, so that my cable leans to the right and the other knit stitch is behind it. This is different than the 1-1 RPC because there is no purl. Both of these stitches are going to be knit. So I'm going to slip one to the cable needle and hold it towards the back. Then I'm going to knit one and then I will knit one off of the cable needle. And you can see that took my cable, slants it to the right, and the other stitch goes behind it. Again, this is different than the RP stitch because, or the RPC because there is no purl. Both of those stitches are knit. Now, to do that 1-1 RC without the use of a cable needle, I can do it a couple of ways. So here's the first one. The first is rearranging the stitches. I want to take this second stitch and move it in front of the first stitch, putting that first stitch behind the second stitch. So reversing the order. So in order to do this, I go into the second stitch on the needle purlwise. I pull it long just so I can pivot that needle. Then I go into the first stitch purlwise and I slip those 2 off the needle. I put them back onto the left needle purlwise and then I can knit each stitch. And that is the right cross without a cable needle. I do have one more way that will show you how to work a right cross without the use of a cable needle. If I'm doing a pattern that uses a lot of these 1-1 RC stitches, this is what I like to do. So what I'm going to do, instead of rearranging the stitches, I'm actually going to do this all in one go. So I'm going to knit these 2 together. Then I'm going to knit just the first stitch on the needle and make sure it hasn't climbed over the second stitch. I'm going to take those off the needle, and there is my right cross without the use of a cable needle. So there are those 3 different ways to work it, and they all achieve the same result. Next we have the 1-1 LPC and the 1-1 RPC. These stitches indicate that there's going to be a purl stitch involved with our cross. So it's still a left cross, but there's going to be a purl stitch as part of it. We have a left cross, so our stockinette stitch, the knit stitch, is still going to slant towards the left, but we're going to begin by having a purl stitch. And for the right cross, we're still making our stockinette stitch slant towards the right, but we're going to have a purl stitch after that. Let's see what this looks like on the needles. Now I'm going to work my 1/1 LPC. This is a left cross, so my cable is going to cross in the front. The knit stitch goes this way, and the purl stitch is going to be the first stitch that I work, but it still needs to be behind the cables. So in order to work this one, I need to grab that first knit stitch, that stockinette stitch, put it onto my cable needle and hold it to the front. Next, I'm going to purl, and then I will knit off of the cable needle. That takes my stockinette cable and crosses it to the left with the purl stitches towards the back. Now you can work this without a cable needle, it's just slightly more complicated. Let me show you what that looks like. Now, in order to work this one without a cable needle, I need to reorient my stitches so that this stitch right here, this second stitch on the needle, becomes the first stitch. But I don't want it to be in front of my cable. So going into the back of that stitch purlwise, I'm going to be getting ready to reorient it. And then I need to take my needle with that stitch, that second stitch is on purlwise. I'm going to take my needle and go into the first stitch purlwise, then pull those off the needle. I slip them back onto my left needle. They're now reoriented so that I have the first stitch is a purl stitch. I will purl that. The second stitch is a knit stitch. It crosses in front of the purl, and that cable is complete. Let me show you that one more time because this is a little bit trickier if you're not using a cable needle. So going into the back of the purl stitch, the second stitch on the needle, I go in purlwise with my needle, and I keep holding my yarn, but you don't actually need to. So I go into the back of my purl stitch, then go into the front of the first stitch on the needle, just go in purlwise, pull those off, and slip them back onto the needle. Sometimes these two stitches will sort of climb on top of each other. Just separate them so that you work them correctly. The first stitch is a purl stitch, and the second stitch is a knit stitch. And that is the 1/1 LPC. I'm ready to work my 1/1 RPC, and that slash is going to indicate that I'm going to be reversing the order of one single stitch and one single stitch. So 2 stitches will be involved in this right cross. Because there's a P in there, I know that means there's going to be a purl stitch, and you can see from the symbol that the stockinette stitch is going to slant to the right while the purl stitch goes behind. In order to do this, I slip this first purl stitch to my cable needle. I hold it to the back of my knitting so that this stockinette cable can cross in front. I knit that stitch, and then I purl one off of the cable needle. And that is my 1/1 RPC. Now I'm going to show you a shortcut way to do this without the cable needle. Here's a way to work the 1/1 RPC without the use of a cable needle. I want this stitch to remain oriented with the right leg in front, but I want that purl stitch to be over here on the other side. That's the second stitch on the needle. I'm going into it purlwise, and then I'm going to go into the first stitch purlwise because that's going to twist the stitches and reorient them. So I'm going to slip in to the second stitch purlwise, and I kind of pull it out to make this longer, go into the first stitch purlwise, and when I pull it off of my needle, I just slip those stitches back on purlwise to my left needle, and now my stockinette stitch is in front, so I knit that stitch, and my purl stitch is in the back, so I purl that stitch. I'm going to show you that method one more time. I want to move this stitch to be in front of the purl stitch. So I go into the second stitch purlwise, pull it out a little, go into the first stitch purlwise. You can see it's a little fiddly. Pull those off of the needle, and that reorients them. I slip them back on purlwise, and you can see that stockinette stitch is in the front. I knit that stitch. And the purl stitch is in the back, so I purl that stitch. And that is my 1/1 RPC. Finally, we have the 1/2 LPC and the 1/2 RPC. So once again, we have a left cross and a right cross, but this one involves 2 purl stitches. If you're looking at your symbol, you can see that this stockinette line right here is very skinny compared to that longer section of purl. That's because we're actually going to be fitting 2 purl stitches in right here and 1 knit stitch. The symbols are a good graphic representation of what we're doing, and if you are able to work from charts, you can see the way that the cables move just by looking at the way that they flow in the charts. Let's see what these look like on the needles. All right, I'm ready to work my 1/2 LPC. So it's a left cross that involves purl stitches. My 1 stockinette cable is this skinny line right here, and then there's room for 2 purl stitches, which are going to be before the stockinette knit stitch. I'm going to work this stitch by slipping 1 stitch onto my cable needle and holding it to the front. Because this is my knit stitch, I want that to stay on top of the purl stitches. I purl 2 from my left needle. Just be sure that cable needle stays out of your way. And then I knit 1 stitch. This takes that knit stitch and slants it in front of the 2 purl stitches. Now, I do not find it easy to work this particular stitch, the 1/2 LPC or the 1/2 RPC, without a cable needle. I like to use the cable needle for this because I end up dropping stitches if I do not. And so I'm going to show you that one more time with the cable needle. Of course, you are welcome to do it whatever method you prefer. I'm going to slip 1 stitch to my cable needle, hold it to the front, purl 2, and knit 1 off of the cable needle. And that is my 1/2 LPC. All right, I'm ready to work my 1/2 RPC. So what I want to do is take 1 stitch and stretch it in front of the other 2 stitches that are going to be purl stitches. And in this pattern, they are already purl stitches. So what I'm going to do is slip these 2 purl stitches onto my cable needle. I'm going to hold my cable needle to the back of my knitting and make sure your yarn doesn't get caught up in the cable needle while you knit 1 stitch off the left needle. And now I'm going to purl the 2 stitches that were on hold on my cable needle. Now, that stockinette stitch has stretched in front of the 2 purl stitches. You can see my nice clean line curve around, and those purl stitches are in the back of the cable patterning. Let me show you that stitch again. Again, we're working the 1/2 RPC, which is a right purl cross. I'm going to take my 2 purl stitches, slip them onto my cable needle, and hold them to the back of the work. Then I'm going to knit 1 off of the left needle, and then purl the 2 that are on the cable needle. Make sure your cable needle doesn't twist while you're doing this. And just to double check, I've got my stockinette stitch right here. The stockinette cable is going in front of the purl stitches, and that stitch is complete. Thank you so much for joining me, learning how to do all of these different cabled stitches. Again, these first 4 stitches, I find those easiest to work with or without a cable needle, but I do prefer to use a cable needle for these last 2 stitches. I have done it without, but sometimes stitches get lost, and I found it's just most efficient for my knitting style to continue to use the cable needle for those stitches. You can find this pattern and all of my designs on Ravelry and paperdaisycreations.com. And as always, I wish you very happy knitting.